Welcome to the world of science fiction, where extraordinary stories come to life. If you've subscribed for more stories, enjoy the ride now. Zara Kethvoren's plasma blade hummed with the satisfied energy of decisive victory as she stood over her fallen opponent in the center of the Nexus arena. 50,000 beings from across 17 different star systems roared their approval from the crystalline tiers that rose like a metallic mountain around the combat platform. The Altarian champion she'd just defeated, a 7-foot-tall warrior whose natural armor plating had withstood plasma cannons, lay unconscious at her feet, victim of a finishing combination that would be analyzed and replayed across sports networks for years to come. Ladies, gentlemen, and entities of all classifications, the arena announcer's voice boomed through translation matrices that converted his words into harmonics recognizable by every species present. Zara Kethvoren of the Draconian Empire maintains her championship title for the 37th consecutive match. Zara raised her blade toward the luxury boxes where Galactic media representatives scrambled to capture the perfect image of her triumph. Her golden eyes blazed with the fierce satisfaction that had made her a legend, while her pointed ears caught the subtle overtones in the crowd's cheering that indicated genuine awe rather than mere entertainment. 3 years as Galactic champion had taught her to read the nuances of interspecies appreciation. The victory felt particularly sweet because the Altarian had been genuinely challenging. His species' natural carapace made conventional attacks nearly useless, forcing Zara to rely on precision strikes that exploited the microscopic gaps in his armor. The fight had lasted nearly 20 minutes, an eternity by arena standards, and required techniques she'd been developing in private for months. Champion Kethvoren, called Arena Marshal Vorth, a Centaurian official whose 4 arms made him ideally suited for managing the complex logistics of interspecies combat sports. Victory ceremony will commence in 5 minutes. Please prepare for the traditional address. Zara nodded and began the familiar ritual of acknowledging the crowd's appreciation. She'd learned early in her championship career that Galactic audiences expected more than just combat prowess from their champion. They wanted someone who could embody the noble warrior ideal that existed in the mythologies of most civilized species, honorable, skilled, and gracious in victory. The arena's environmental systems adjusted to optimize conditions for her species, bringing the temperature up to the warmth that Draconians preferred and subtly shifting the lighting spectrum to enhance the natural luminescence of her scales. These small accommodations were privileges of championship status, though Zara had long since stopped noticing such details. What she did notice was the sudden shift in the crowd's energy. The celebratory roar faltered, replaced by a confused murmur that rippled through the tiers like wind through tall grass. Zara's combat-honed instincts immediately went on alert, her blade still humming as she scanned the arena for whatever had caught the audience's attention. The massive display screens that ringed the arena flickered to life with information that made Zara's blood run cold with anticipation and confusion in equal measure. Late entry accepted, contestant 847 Alpha. Below this heading, the screens displayed details that seemed almost absurd in the context of Galactic Championship combat. Species, human, Terra. Combat experience, civilian. Augmentations, none detected. Weapon classification, none registered. Sponsor, Terran Diplomatic Corps. What kind of joke is this? Zara muttered, though her words were picked up by the arena's audio sensors and broadcast to the crowd through the translation matrix. Her confusion was shared by thousands of spectators who began voicing their own bewilderment in dozens of languages. The crowd's murmur grew to a buzz, then to a confused roar as beings from across the galaxy tried to make sense of what they were seeing. Humans were known throughout civilized space, of course. Their recent emergence as a diplomatic species had been widely reported, but they were considered a minor civilization with primitive technology and no significant military capabilities. Arena Marshal Vorth approached with an expression that suggested he was as confused as everyone else. Champion Kethvoren, I must inform you that a late entry has been officially accepted by the tournament authority. The contestant meets all technical requirements for participation. Technical requirements? Zara's voice carried the dangerous edge that opponents had learned to fear. What technical requirements allow a civilian with no combat experience to enter the Galactic Championship? The rules state that any sentient being from a recognized diplomatic species may enter, provided they can demonstrate basic motor function and sign the liability waivers, Vorth replied with the uncomfortable precision of someone quoting regulations they'd rather not have to enforce. The human delegation has provided all necessary documentation. Zara looked up at the luxury boxes, where she could see the emergency session of arena officials gesturing frantically at each other. Whatever was happening, it was clearly unprecedented in a tournament's 3-century history. Has anyone actually seen this human? She asked. He should be entering the preparation chamber shortly, Vorth said, consulting a holographic schedule that flickered with constant updates. Champion, I should mention that the betting houses are having difficulty establishing odds for this match. The arena's main entrance, a massive archway designed to accommodate the largest species in known space, began to iris open with the ceremonial fanfare that announced each new contestant. Zara turned to face the entrance, her blade ready and her mind racing through everything she knew about humans. The species was relatively new to galactic civilization, having achieved faster-than-light travel only recently. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards, their military capabilities minimal, and their physical abilities unremarkable compared to most civilized species. They were known for their diplomatic initiatives and their unusual approach to problem-solving, but nothing in the galactic databases suggested they had any business in a combat arena. The figure that emerged from the entrance tunnel did nothing to change Zara's assessment. Marcus Chen walked into the arena with the casual stride of someone taking an afternoon stroll rather than entering mortal combat. He wore what appeared to be civilian clothing, dark pants, a simple shirt, and shoes that looked comfortable rather than tactical. His unremarkable brown hair was slightly disheveled, and his expression suggested mild curiosity rather than the focused intensity Zara expected from opponents. The arena fell silent in a way that Zara had never experienced in 3 years of championship fighting. Not the expectant silence of audiences waiting for combat to begin, but the confused silence of 50,000 beings trying to process something that didn't make sense. Marcus reached the center of the combat platform and looked around with genuine interest, his gaze taking in the massive arena structure with the appreciation of someone seeing impressive architecture for the first time. When his eyes met Zara's, he smiled and offered a small wave that somehow managed to be both friendly and completely inappropriate for the circumstances. Champion Kethvorin, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the arena's acoustics despite being spoken at conversational volume. It's an honor to meet you. I've watched recordings of your previous matches, your technique is really remarkable. Zara stared at him, her blade wavering slightly as she tried to reconcile this polite, unarmed human with the deadly combat situation they were supposed to be engaging in. Everything about Marcus Chen contradicted her expectations, from his casual demeanor to his complete lack of visible weapons or defensive equipment. You're the human contestant? She asked, though the answer was obvious. Marcus Chen, Emergency Response Coordinator for King County, Washington, he replied with the same tone he might use for introducing himself at a dinner party. I'm here representing Earth's interests in the tournament, though I have to admit I'm not entirely sure what those interests are yet. Emergency Response Coordinator. Zara repeated. Mostly disaster management and crisis intervention, Marcus explained helpfully. Though I suppose combat sports could fall under crisis intervention, depending on how you look at it. The crowd's confusion was becoming palpable, and Zara realized she was facing something completely outside her experience. Every opponent she'd ever faced had radiated either fear or aggression, emotions she'd learned to read and exploit for tactical advantage. Marcus Chen seemed to be experiencing neither. Do you understand what this is? She asked, gesturing with her plasma blade toward the arena around them. This is championship combat. Galactic-level single combat with weapons designed to kill. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. I got the basic briefing from the diplomatic corps. Single combat, traditional weapons, first incapacitation or surrender determines victory. It's actually similar to some conflict resolution protocols we use back home, just with higher stakes and better publicity. Higher stakes. Zara's voice rose despite her efforts to maintain composure. These are fights to the death, human. I've been Galactic Champion for 3 years. I've defeated warriors from species that evolved specifically for combat. What exactly makes you think you can survive 30 seconds against me? Marcus considered this question with the same thoughtful expression he'd worn while examining the arena architecture. Well, I figure everyone deserves a chance to try something new. Plus, the diplomatic corps seemed to think it was important for humanity to participate. Something about demonstrating our commitment to galactic civilization. By getting yourself killed in front of 50,000 spectators. Hopefully not, Marcus replied with a smile that suggested he found the entire situation more interesting than terrifying. Though I admit I'm curious to see how this works out. I've never been in a formal combat situation before. Zara felt something she'd never experienced in 3 years of championship fighting, complete tactical confusion. She couldn't read Marcus's strategy because he didn't seem to have one. She couldn't exploit his fear because he didn't appear to be afraid. She couldn't intimidate him because he was treating their conversation like a friendly chat rather than pre-combat psychological warfare. "Arena Marshal," she called, not taking her eyes off Marcus. "Are you certain this human meets the requirements for participation?" "All paperwork is in order," Vorth replied, though his voice suggested he shared her bewilderment. "The contestant has signed all liability waivers and demonstrated basic physical competency." "Basic physical competency," Zara muttered, then raised her voice to address Marcus directly. "Human, I don't know what kind of cultural misunderstanding brought you here, but this isn't a diplomatic exercise. This is real combat with real weapons against someone who's spent her entire life training to kill efficiently." Marcus nodded appreciatively. "Your dedication to your craft is really impressive. I've been reading about draconian combat traditions during the flight here, fascinating stuff. The integration of physical prowess with tactical psychology, the emphasis on honorable victory, the whole warrior-scholar concept. It's quite admirable. You've been studying my species' combat traditions?" "Just the basics. I like to understand the cultural context of the situations I'm walking into. Helps with the whole crisis management thing." Zara realized that the confused murmur of the crowd had died away entirely, leaving the arena in absolute silence as 50,000 beings waited to see what would happen when the galaxy's most accomplished warrior faced an apparently defenseless human who treated mortal combat like an interesting cultural exchange. "Combat will commence in 60 seconds, Arena Marshal Vorth announced, his voice carrying across the silent Colosseum. "Contestants, prepare for engagement." Zara raised her plasma blade and fell into the combat stance that had become her signature, a perfect balance of offense and defense that allowed for lightning-fast attacks while maintaining optimal protection. Every line of her body spoke of deadly competence earned through years of training and dozens of victories against the galaxy's finest warriors. Marcus Chen remained standing casually in the center of the platform, his hands empty and his expression one of polite interest, as if he were waiting for a tour guide to explain the next exhibit in a museum. 10 seconds, Vorth called. Zara felt the familiar pre-combat clarity settle over her mind, the heightened awareness that allowed her to process tactical information at superhuman speed. Every detail of the arena environment registered in her consciousness, the slight air currents, the acoustical properties of the space, the exact positioning of her opponent. Marcus continued to stand there, apparently lost in thought. Combat, commence. The arena erupted in light and sound as Zara launched herself forward in the opening move that had defeated 36 consecutive opponents. Her plasma blade traced a deadly arc through the air, aimed with precision that would have been impossible for most species to achieve or avoid. Marcus Chen took a step backward, raised his hands, and said something that stopped not just Zara's attack, but the collective breath of everyone watching. Whoa there. Let's talk about this. Zara's plasma blade hung in the air 12 inches from where Marcus Chen had been standing a moment before, its energy field crackling with frustrated potential. The human had somehow moved just far enough to avoid her opening strike while maintaining the same relaxed posture that had characterized his entire approach to this encounter. What should have been a decisive first blow had instead become an awkward pause in what was supposed to be Galactic Championship combat. Sorry, Marcus said, his tone carrying genuine apology. "I know that probably looked like the start of something, but I really think we should discuss this situation before anyone gets hurt." The arena's silence was so complete that individual heartbeats from the crowd would have been audible if most of the species present actually had hearts in the conventional sense. Zara had never experienced anything like the collective bewilderment radiating from 50,000 spectators who'd come to watch a championship fight and instead found themselves witnessing something that defied every category of combat they knew. "Discuss." Zara managed, her blade still poised for an attack that no longer made tactical sense. "Well, yes," Marcus replied reasonably. "I mean, I understand this is a traditional combat sport with cultural significance and everything, but from a crisis management perspective, we're looking at a situation where someone is definitely going to get seriously injured if we proceed as planned. That's the point." Zara snapped, her frustration beginning to override her tactical training. "This is combat, human. Injury is not just expected, it's required. The entire concept revolves around one of us defeating the other through superior skill and application of force." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, as if she'd just explained an interesting philosophical position rather than the fundamental nature of their current predicament. "I can see how that would work from a traditional sports entertainment perspective. But what if there was a way to resolve this that demonstrated both our species' capabilities without anyone ending up in a medical facility?" "There isn't," Zara said flatly. "The rules are clear. Combat continues until one contestant is incapacitated or surrenders. There's no third option." "There's always a third option," Marcus replied with the confidence of someone who'd apparently made a career out of finding alternatives that didn't exist. "Sometimes it just takes creative thinking to identify it." Zara found herself lowering her weapon slightly, not because she was abandoning the fight but because she was trying to process a conversation that violated everything she understood about combat psychology. Marcus wasn't showing fear, which she could exploit. He wasn't showing aggression, which she could counter. He was showing what appeared to be genuine problem-solving interest, and she had no tactical framework for dealing with that. "Champion Kethvorin," Arena Marshal Vortha's voice crackled through the communication system, "is there some form of technical difficulty with the engagement?" "No technical difficulty," Zara called back, her eyes never leaving Marcus. "Just, unusual circumstances." The betting displays around the arena had gone haywire, with odds fluctuating wildly as bookmakers tried to calculate probabilities for a situation that had no precedent. Most had stopped taking new wagers entirely, while others were offering exotic bets on outcomes like combat resolved through mediation or mutual withdrawal for safety reasons. "Marcus," Zara said, using his name for the first time and somehow making it sound like both a question and a threat, "what exactly do you think is going to happen here? Because from where I'm standing, you're an unarmed civilian facing a galactic champion in single combat. The mathematics of this situation are very straightforward." "Are they though?" Marcus asked, and for the first time since entering the arena, his expression shifted from polite interest to what looked like professional focus. "I mean, yes, you're clearly a skilled warrior with superior weapons and training. But we're not really fighting about anything, are we? There's no resource conflict, no territorial dispute, no ideological disagreement that requires resolution through violence. We're fighting because it's a tournament," Zara said, though even as the words left her mouth she realized how inadequate they sounded as justification for mortal combat. "Right, but tournaments exist to determine something. Usually superiority in some measurable skill set. What exactly are we trying to prove here?" Zara felt her tactical certainty beginning to slip. "That I'm the superior warrior." "Okay, but superior at what, specifically? You've already demonstrated superior weapon skills, superior physical conditioning, superior tactical training. I don't think anyone in this arena doubts that you could defeat me in conventional combat." "Then surrender," Zara said, though the suggestion felt hollow even to her. "But that wouldn't prove anything useful, would it? Everyone already knows you're a better fighter than a civilian emergency coordinator from Earth. Having me surrender would be like challenging a child to demonstrate adult superiority, true but not particularly meaningful." The crowd was beginning to react to their extended conversation, with various species expressing confusion, impatience, and in some cases what sounded like appreciation for this unexpected development in tournament format. Sports commentators were struggling to maintain their traditional play-by-play coverage when the players were engaged in philosophical discourse rather than combat. "What are you suggesting?" Zara asked, realizing that Marcus had somehow maneuvered their conversation into territory where she was asking him for guidance rather than demanding his surrender. "Well, what if instead of fighting to prove who's stronger, we collaborated to prove something more interesting?" "Such as?" Marcus gestured toward the arena around them, his movement taking in both the massive structure and the thousands of spectators from dozens of different species. "Look at this place. Representatives from civilizations across the galaxy, all gathering to celebrate skill and competition. What if we demonstrated that different approaches to problem-solving can work together rather than against each other?" "This is a combat tournament," Zara repeated, though she was beginning to sound like she was trying to convince herself as much as him. "Sure, but it's also a diplomatic event. Cultural exchange on a galactic scale. What would happen if the reigning champion and a newcomer from a developing species found a way to showcase both traditional combat excellence and innovative conflict resolution?" Zara's blade lowered another inch as she found herself genuinely considering Marcus's words. "The tournament rules don't allow for collaborative demonstration. Do they specifically forbid it?" She thought about this, running through the regulations she'd memorized during her first championship year. The rules require engagement until incapacitation or surrender. They don't specify the nature of the engagement. "There you go," Marcus said with a smile that suggested he'd found the creative solution he'd been looking for. "What if we engaged in a way that demonstrated both your combat mastery and human adaptability? A kind of tactical problem-solving exercise that lets you showcase your skills while I showcase mine." "What kind of problem-solving exercise?" "Well, you're the expert in combat scenarios. What would be a meaningful challenge that would let you demonstrate your abilities while also showing the audience something they've never seen before?" Zara found herself intrigued despite every instinct that told her this was the strangest championship match in galactic history. "You're suggesting we turn this into some kind of exhibition rather than actual combat?" "I'm suggesting we turn this into meaningful demonstration rather than ritual violence," Marcus replied. "Though I should mention that from my perspective, any physical challenge you design is likely to result in me getting thoroughly outperformed, so it's not like you're giving up the opportunity to prove your superiority." The arena's crowd was growing restless, with some sections beginning to voice their impatience at the extended pre-combat discussion. Arena Marshal Vortha's voice crackled through the communication system again. "Contestants, please be advised that engagement protocols require active participation within established timeframes." "We need to make a decision," Zara said. "Agreed. What's your assessment of the situation?" Zara looked at this impossible human who had somehow turned her championship defense into a collaborative planning session. "My assessment is that you're either the most clever psychological warfare specialist in galactic history, or you're genuinely trying to find a way for both of us to succeed in a situation designed for only one winner. Which do you think is more likely?" She studied his face, looking for the subtle tells that would indicate deception or hidden agenda. What she found instead was what appeared to be authentic curiosity and a complete absence of the competitive hostility that had characterized every opponent she'd ever faced. "I think," she said slowly, "that you're about to make this the most unusual championship match in tournament history." "Is that good or bad?" "I have no idea," Zara admitted. "But I'm curious enough to find out." Marcus's grin was bright enough to be seen from the upper tiers. "Great. So what's the most challenging combat scenario you can think of that would showcase your skills while also requiring creative problem-solving?" Zara raised her plasma blade again, but this time her stance was thoughtful rather than aggressive. "Adaptive combat. Multiple scenario challenges with increasing complexity, requiring both physical skill and tactical innovation." "Perfect. I assume that would involve me trying to survive increasingly difficult challenges while you demonstrate the techniques needed to overcome them?" "Something like that. Though I should warn you that even in a demonstration format, you're likely to get hurt. Possibly seriously hurt. Marcus nodded seriously. I appreciate the honesty. But I'd rather risk injury trying something worthwhile than guarantee it by sticking to approaches that don't make sense. Arena Marshal Vorth, Zara called out, her voice carrying across the silent Colosseum, we request permission to modify the engagement format to adaptive combat demonstration, with champion exhibition and challenger survival scenarios. The pause that followed was long enough for several civilizations to experience minor governmental crises. Champion Kethvorin, Vorth finally replied, his voice carefully neutral, such a format has no precedent in tournament history. Do the rules forbid unprecedented approaches? Marcus asked, his voice pitched to carry to the marshal's station. Another pause. The rules do not specifically forbid adaptive format modification, provided both contestants agree and all safety protocols are observed. We agree, Zara and Marcus said simultaneously, then looked at each other with expressions that suggested they were both surprised by their own decision. Very well, Vorth announced to the crowd. By mutual consent of the contestants, this championship match will proceed under adaptive demonstration format. Champion Kethvorin will design progressive challenges to showcase galactic-level combat skills, while contestant Chen will demonstrate human adaptability and survival techniques. The crowd's response was immediate and mixed. Cheering from those excited by the unprecedented development, confused murmuring from traditionalists, and what sounded like appreciation from the diplomatic sections where representatives from various governments were realizing they might be witnessing the evolution of interspecies relations in real time. So, Marcus said, turning back to Zara with the same interested expression he'd worn since entering the arena, what's the first challenge? Zara looked at this remarkable human who had somehow convinced her to abandon 3 years of championship protocol in favor of something that had never been attempted before, and realized that she was more excited about the next 10 minutes than she'd been about combat in months. The first challenge, she said, raising her plasma blade with renewed purpose, is surviving my attack patterns while demonstrating human evasion techniques. Try not to die. Marcus's response was delivered with the cheerful confidence of someone who'd spent his career finding creative solutions to impossible problems. I'll do my best. Zara's first demonstration attack was a masterpiece of controlled violence, a spinning blade sequence that showcased 3 different traditional draconian techniques while creating a pattern complex enough to challenge any opponent, yet predictable enough for someone truly skilled to read and counter. She expected Marcus to attempt some form of desperate evasion, probably failing spectacularly and requiring medical intervention within the first 30 seconds. Instead, Marcus did something that made her nearly lose her balance. He stepped into the attack pattern rather than away from it, moving with precise timing that brought him inside her blade's arc where the weapon couldn't effectively engage him. Proximity negation, he said conversationally as her blade whistled harmlessly past his shoulder. If you can't avoid the danger, sometimes you can get so close to it that it can't hurt you. The arena's crowd released a collective gasp that echoed off the crystalline walls like trapped thunder. What Marcus had just demonstrated wasn't advanced combat technique, it was applied crisis management principles that happened to work against traditional weapon patterns. Zara completed her attack sequence and spun to face him, her golden eyes blazing with something between amazement and professional indignation. That's not a combat technique. No, Marcus agreed, maintaining his position at what would have been optimal range for a follow-up strike if Zara had been trying to kill him rather than demonstrate her skills. It's a fire safety principle. When you can't escape a flashover, you move to the area of least thermal activity, which is usually right next to the source. Fire safety. Emergency response covers a lot of ground. Structural collapses, hazardous material incidents, natural disasters, civil unrest. You learn to read dangerous patterns and find the safe spaces within them. Zara raised her blade for the second demonstration sequence, this one designed to showcase precision targeting while eliminating the close-quarters vulnerability Marcus had just exploited. What about this pattern? Her next attack was a series of rapid thrust and withdraw motions that maintained optimal distance while creating a web of plasma traces that should have been impossible to navigate without enhanced reflexes or predictive technology. Marcus responded by doing something that shouldn't have worked. he began moving before she did. Not predictively, as if he knew what her attacks would be, but reactively, as if he was reading her body language and responding to her intentions rather than her actions. His movement patterns looked like someone avoiding traffic in a busy intersection, not graceful or martial, but effective and oddly purposeful. Pattern recognition, he explained while weaving through her attack sequence with the focused attention of someone solving a complex puzzle. Humans are really good at identifying repetitive behaviors and anticipating cyclical events. It's how we predict weather patterns, economic trends, social dynamics. You're treating my combat techniques like weather patterns? More like traffic flow. Dangerous, but following predictable rules once you understand the underlying system. Zara's third demonstration was designed to eliminate the possibility of pattern prediction by incorporating deliberately random elements, sudden direction changes, variable timing, and technique combinations that violated traditional forms in favor of unpredictable effectiveness. This, she was certain, would force Marcus to rely on pure reflexes he couldn't possibly possess. Marcus's response was to stop moving defensively and start moving collaboratively. Instead of trying to avoid her attacks, he began positioning himself in ways that made her techniques more effective for demonstration purposes while keeping himself just barely out of range of serious injury. "What are you doing?" Zara demanded as her blade traced a perfect arc exactly where Marcus had positioned himself to showcase its lethality to the crowd. "Crisis support," Marcus replied, now moving in what appeared to be a choreographed dance with her weapon patterns. In emergency response, sometimes the best way to manage a dangerous situation is to help it resolve safely rather than fighting it directly. "You're helping me fight you. I'm helping you demonstrate your skills in a way that's safe for both of us and educational for the audience. Isn't that better than me getting stabbed while failing to impress anyone?" The arena's crowd was reacting to their exchange with growing fascination. What had started as curiosity about an unusual tournament format was evolving into something approaching awe as spectators realized they were witnessing a completely new form of combat, one that prioritized collaboration and mutual success over dominance and defeat. Sports commentators were struggling to maintain their traditional coverage format when the competitors were engaged in what looked more like an advanced training exercise than championship combat. Military observers in the diplomatic boxes were taking notes with the intensity of people witnessing the birth of a new tactical philosophy. "Fourth demonstration," Zara announced, her voice carrying across the arena with growing confidence. If Marcus wanted to turn this into collaborative problem-solving, she was going to give him a problem that would test the limits of human adaptability. She activated her blade's secondary functions, creating a weapon that projected energy fields in complex geometric patterns while maintaining its cutting edge. The result was something that could attack from multiple angles simultaneously while creating barriers that limited movement options. It was a technique she developed for opponents who relied on superior mobility, and it should have been impossible for an unenhanced human to navigate. Marcus studied the energy pattern for a moment, then grinned with what looked like professional appreciation. "Multivector containment scenario. Okay, that's genuinely challenging." He began moving through the energy maze with movements that looked less like combat evasion and more like someone navigating a complex obstacle course. His approach wasn't to fight the barriers but to find the spaces between them, treating the energy fields like environmental hazards to be managed rather than attacks to be countered. "Spatial efficiency," he explained while threading between plasma barriers that would have killed most beings on contact. In disaster response, you often have to move through environments where most of the available space is dangerous. You learn to find the safe paths and use them effectively. "This isn't disaster response," Zara said, though her tone carried more admiration than criticism. "This is combat." "Is it though? I mean, right now we're engaged in collaborative skill demonstration with educational value for interspecies cultural exchange. That sounds more like advanced training than combat to me." Zara realized that Marcus had somehow redefined their entire encounter without her noticing. What should have been a fight to determine superior warrior status had become a joint presentation on the compatibility of different approaches to dangerous situations. "Fifth demonstration," she announced, and this time her voice carried genuine excitement rather than obligation. Marcus's perspective was making her see her own skills in a new light, and she found herself curious about what would happen if she designed a challenge that played to both their strengths rather than just testing his weaknesses. What if, she said, raising her blade in a stance that combined traditional form with experimental innovation, we designed a scenario that required both combat excellence and crisis management skills. Marcus's expression shifted to what she was learning to recognize as his professional problem-solving mode. What did you have in mind? Adaptive threat response. I create increasingly complex attack patterns while you demonstrate escalation management techniques. The goal isn't for you to defeat me or for me to defeat you, it's to show how different skill sets can work together to resolve dangerous situations. That, Marcus said with enthusiasm that was clearly audible throughout the arena, sounds like the most useful combat demonstration I've ever heard of. The crowd's reaction suggested that 50,000 beings from across the galaxy agreed with his assessment. What had started as confusion about an unprecedented tournament format was evolving into appreciation for something genuinely new and valuable. Arena Marshal Vorth, Zara called out, we request permission to extend the demonstration format to collaborative adaptive threat response exercise. Permission granted, came Vorth's immediate reply, his voice suggesting that he was as curious as everyone else to see what would happen next. Zara began her final demonstration sequence, a complex pattern that incorporated everything she'd learned about Marcus's capabilities while showcasing her own skills at their highest level. The result was something that looked like a deadly dance, with Marcus's crisis management techniques complementing her combat mastery to create something neither could have achieved alone. As they moved together through increasingly complex scenarios, the arena fell into the kind of respectful silence usually reserved for witnessing genuine artistry. Military strategists in the audience were realizing they were watching the birth of new tactical approaches. Diplomats were understanding that they were seeing a demonstration of cooperation that could revolutionize interspecies relations. You know, Marcus said during a brief pause between sequences, his voice carrying clearly through the arena's acoustics, this is actually more challenging than traditional combat. How so? Zara asked, genuinely curious. Traditional combat has a clear victory condition, defeat your opponent. This requires constantly adapting to support both participants' success. It's like the difference between winning a race and helping everyone finish safely. And which do you prefer? Marcus considered this while they prepared for their final collaborative sequence. Well, winning races is satisfying, but helping everyone succeed builds stronger communities. And stronger communities are better at handling the next crisis. Zara raised her blade for what she realized would be the concluding demonstration of the most unusual championship match in galactic history. Is that the human approach to conflict resolution? Building stronger communities? It's the human approach to everything, Marcus replied. We figured out early that cooperation works better than competition for long-term survival. As they began their final sequence, a spectacular display that showcased both draconian combat mastery and human adaptive problem-solving. Zara realized that she'd learned more about effective tactics in the past hour than she had in months of traditional training. The arena erupted in appreciation as their demonstration concluded, but the applause carried a different quality than the cheering that typically followed her victories. This was recognition of something new and valuable rather than celebration of familiar dominance. Champion Kethvorin, Arena Marshal Vorth announced as their performance ended, Contestant Shen, this has been unprecedented in tournament history. How do we determine a winner? Zara and Marcus looked at each other, then at the crowd that was clearly waiting for their answer. I think, Zara said slowly, that might be the wrong question. What's the right question? Marcus asked. The right question is, what did we just prove? Marcus smiled, and his answer carried across the arena with the clarity of someone who'd spent his career finding better solutions to complex problems. We proved that the best victories are the ones where everyone gets to walk away stronger than they started. The applause that followed their collaborative demonstration lasted for 7 minutes and required Arena Marshal Vorth to activate crowd control protocols designed for celebrations involving species with multiple respiratory systems. Zara stood in the center of the combat platform, her plasma blade deactivated for the first time since entering championship competition 3 years ago, and experienced something she'd never felt after a match: uncertainty about what victory actually meant. Marcus Chen stood beside her, looking slightly winded but remarkably intact for someone who just engaged in an hour of high-intensity tactical demonstration with the galaxy's most accomplished warrior. His civilian clothes were disheveled and his hair was even more unruly than when he'd entered the arena, but his expression carried the satisfied exhaustion of someone who just solved a particularly challenging problem. "Well," he said, his voice barely audible over the continuing ovation, "that was educational." "Educational," Zara repeated, testing the word as if encountering it for the first time. "Is that what we just did? Education?" "Among other things. Though I think we also accidentally created something that's going to give military strategists across the galaxy some very interesting ideas." The arena's main display screens flickered to life with statistical analysis that made Zara's achievements look both more and less impressive than she'd ever seen them. Her combat techniques had been recorded and quantified with unprecedented precision, but they were being presented alongside Marcus's crisis management methods in ways that suggested collaboration rather than competition. "Champion Kethvorin," Arena Marshal Vortha's voice carried across the gradually quieting Colosseum, "this situation presents certain administrative challenges for tournament record-keeping." "Such as?" Zara called back. "The traditional categories of victory, defeat, and withdrawal do not appear to apply to what just occurred." Both contestants demonstrated superior capabilities in their respective specializations while achieving collaborative success in joint tactical problem-solving. Marcus looked up at the marshal's station with the expression of someone who'd spent considerable time dealing with bureaucratic complications. "What if you created a new category? Collaborative demonstration with mutual success indicators." "That would require approval from the tournament authority," Vorth replied. "Such a category has no precedent in 3 centuries of arena competition." "Well," Zara said, surprising herself with her response, "maybe it's time for some new precedents." The crowd's reaction to her statement suggested that 50,000 beings from across the galaxy were ready to witness the evolution of their oldest competitive traditions. Diplomatic observers in the luxury boxes were engaged in intense conversations that looked like they might reshape interspecies athletic protocols for generations to come. Dr. Ythsior Thalen, the tournament's chief medical officer, approached with scanning equipment designed to assess post-combat injuries. Her expression carried the professional confusion of someone whose expertise had just become partially irrelevant. "Champion Kethvorin, contestant Chen," she said, activating scanners that had never been used on competitors who'd voluntarily avoided trying to hurt each other, "I'm required to conduct post-engagement medical assessment." "Of course," Marcus replied, standing still while alien medical technology analyzed his physical condition. "How do I look?" "Elevated heart rate, elevated adrenaline, minor muscle fatigue, and various stress indicators consistent with intense physical activity, Dr. Thalen reported, her tone suggesting these results were both expected and entirely insufficient for describing what she'd just witnessed. "No injuries, no tissue damage, no indicators of combat trauma." "And Champion Kethvorin?" Zara submitted to the medical scan, though she already knew what it would show. "Similar indicators, I imagine. Enhanced cardiovascular activity, elevated neural function, muscle engagement consistent with extended tactical demonstration." "Precisely," Dr. Thalen confirmed, then paused as she studied her readouts. "I should note that both contestants show indicators I've never observed in post-combat medical assessment." "Such as?" "Elevated levels of neurotransmitters associated with learning, problem-solving satisfaction, and what human psychology might term, flow state achievement. These are indicators typically associated with successful educational or creative endeavors rather than competitive combat." Marcus grinned. "That makes sense. We spent the last hour basically doing collaborative research into applied tactical theory. It felt more like a really intense training exercise than a fight." "A training exercise," Zara said thoughtfully. "Is that what this was?" "Well, what did you learn?" Zara considered the question while the arena's crowd continued its celebration of something they weren't quite sure how to categorize. I learned that my combat techniques are more adaptable than I realized. That tactical superiority isn't just about defeating opponents, but about finding ways to optimize outcomes for complex situations. And that collaboration can create capabilities that neither participant possesses individually. What else? I learned that humans are more remarkable than our intelligence report suggested. Your species approaches dangerous situations with methods that are completely alien to traditional combat theory, but they're effective in ways that our tactical frameworks don't account for. Marcus nodded seriously. And I learned that draconian combat arts are incredibly sophisticated, not just as fighting techniques, but as applied physics and spatial mathematics. Your understanding of energy dynamics and movement optimization is something human crisis management could really benefit from. So we both learn things that make us better at our respective specializations. And we learn things that make us better at working together, which is probably more valuable than either individual improvement. Arena Marshal Vortha's voice interrupted their conversation. Champion Kethvorin, Contestant Shen, the tournament authority has reached a preliminary decision regarding match classification. And? Zara asked, though she realized she was more curious than anxious about the answer. By unanimous vote, this engagement has been classified as collaborative tactical demonstration with mutual excellence achievement. Both contestants will be credited with successful participation, and the format will be added to official tournament options for future competitions. The crowd's reaction suggested that this decision was being received as vindication for their investment in watching something unprecedented unfold. Cheering from multiple species created a harmonic complexity that the arena's acoustics had never been designed to handle. There is one additional matter, Vorth continued. Champion Kethvorin, your title status remains unchanged, as no traditional combat victory or defeat occurred. However, the tournament authority requests that you consider serving as primary instructor for the new collaborative demonstration format. Zara looked at Marcus, who was watching her with the interested expression she'd learned to associate with his problem-solving mode. What do you think? Would you be interested in helping develop training programs that combine draconian combat techniques with human crisis management principles? That sounds like it could revolutionize how multiple species approach tactical education, Marcus replied. Though I should mention that I'd need to coordinate with my emergency response duties back on Earth. Of course. Though I suspect the diplomatic corps might be interested in establishing a permanent cultural exchange program focused on collaborative tactical development. What now? A formal partnership between Earth Emergency Response Services and Draconian military academies, with the goal of creating new training methods that incorporate both species' approaches to dangerous situations. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his expression suggesting he was processing implications that extended far beyond their arena demonstration. You're talking about fundamentally changing how multiple civilizations think about conflict resolution. I'm talking about taking what we just discovered and using it to help people survive dangerous situations more effectively. Isn't that what both our specializations are ultimately about? Yes, Marcus said slowly, but on a scale that could affect millions of beings across dozens of star systems. Is that a problem? Marcus looked around the arena, where representatives from civilizations across the galaxy were engaged in intense discussions about what they just witnessed. No, he said finally, it's an opportunity. Though I should probably warn you that humans have a tendency to take good ideas and scale them up in ways that get complicated quickly. And draconians have a tendency to turn effective techniques into formal traditions that last for centuries. Between the two approaches, we might actually create something that's both innovative and sustainable. Partnership, Marcus said, extending his hand in the human gesture for agreement. Though I still think it's weird that this all started because I accidentally entered a combat tournament I had no business participating in. Zara clasped his hand in the draconian equivalent of formal accord. I think it started because you refused to accept that there was only one way to approach an impossible situation. And you were willing to consider that maybe your approach wasn't the only effective one. Together, we found something better than either of us could have discovered alone. The arena's celebration continued around them as they shook hands in the center of the combat platform, but Zara realized that the applause was no longer for their individual achievements. It was recognition of what they'd created together. Proof that collaboration could produce results that surpassed competition, and that the strongest victories were the ones where everyone emerged stronger than they'd started. 6 months later, the Nexus Arena hosted the first interspecies collaborative tactical symposium, featuring training demonstrations from military and emergency response specialists representing 43 different civilizations. Zara served as primary combat instructor while Marcus developed crisis management curricula that incorporated techniques from across the galaxy. The symposium's most popular session was their joint presentation on adaptive threat response, combining combat excellence with crisis resolution, which drew capacity audiences and generated enough interest to establish permanent training facilities on 7 different worlds. Their partnership had evolved from an accidental arena encounter into something that was reshaping how multiple species approached dangerous situations. Traditional combat remained important for circumstances that required it, but their collaborative methods were proving more effective for the majority of conflicts that actually occurred in civilized space. "You know," Marcus said during one of their training sessions, as they demonstrated techniques that had no names in any existing combat manual, "I still think it's strange that this all started because I said, let's talk about this instead of trying to fight you." "Stranger things have happened," Zara replied, executing a blade sequence that Marcus complemented with positioning techniques that made her strikes both more effective and completely non-lethal. "Though I admit I never expected to find my most valuable tactical insights through collaboration with someone who had never been in a real fight. And I never expected to help revolutionize interspecies military training by refusing to participate in traditional combat." They paused in their demonstration to address the mixed audience of military strategists, emergency responders, and diplomatic observers who had gathered to study their methods. "The lesson," Zara said to the assembled representatives, "isn't that combat is obsolete or that conflict should be avoided. The lesson is that the most effective approach to any dangerous situation is the one that produces the best outcome for everyone involved. Which sometimes means fighting," Marcus added, "and sometimes means finding ways not to fight, and sometimes means redefining what victory looks like until it becomes something everyone can achieve." "The key," they said together, having delivered this conclusion so many times it had become synchronized, "is being flexible enough to recognize which approach a situation actually requires." Their joint presentation always concluded the same way. With a demonstration that showcased both individual excellence and collaborative achievement, proving that the galaxy's most effective warriors might be the ones who understood that the greatest victories were shared ones. As they took their bows before another capacity audience, Zara reflected that she'd learned more about being a champion in 6 months of collaboration than she had in 3 years of individual dominance. Victory, she discovered, was much more satisfying when it lifted others up rather than striking them down. And Marcus, watching another group of beings from different worlds learn to work together more effectively, realized that his accidental entry into Galactic Championship combat had led to exactly what he'd always tried to achieve in emergency response, helping people survive dangerous situations and emerge stronger than they'd started. Some victories, they'd both learned, were worth more than any individual title.